A respected mother of two. A charming family doctor. A man who thought he had the perfect life. Until his wife and doctor made sure he would never wake up again. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you'll know just how twisted trust can become. It was a quiet evening in a neighborhood where most families had already turned in for the night. Porch lights flickered on in neatly spaced intervals, the streets empty, the air still. Inside one of those homes, a man lay motionless on the living room floor. His wife stood over him, her voice steady, almost mechanical, as she spoke to the 911 operator, "My husband. I think he's having a reaction to something. Please send someone." Her tone never wavered. No panic. No desperation. Just calm, eerie, calculated calm, what the emergency responders would later find wouldn't raise alarm at first. A husband, unresponsive. A wife, concerned. Two children sleeping soundly down the hall. The paramedics did what they were trained to do, but nothing worked. No amount of CPR, no rush to the hospital, no adrenaline injection. Derek Grant was already gone. They called it a tragedy. A freak medical incident. A life cut short far too early. But then came the questions: why were there traces of sedatives in his bloodstream, sedatives he was never prescribed? Why was the family doctor the first to arrive at the hospital, even before the coroner? And why did that same doctor break down in tears when questioned by detectives, only to change his story less than 24 hours later? In the days that followed Derek's death, pieces of a puzzle began to surface. Strange messages. Conflicting statements. And a DNA test that would spark an avalanche. An avalanche that exposed a secret hidden for years: the man who loved his children. The man who worked double shifts to provide for them. The man who looked into their eyes and saw his own, would soon be told they were never his. This wasn't an impulsive act or a single moment of rage. It was deliberate. Planned. The kind of plan that takes time. Coordination. A shared goal between two people who had every reason to keep their secret buried. Point one was his wife. The other, a man he trusted with his life. Tonight, we take you through every page of that story. From the beginning. From the moment they met, to the moment a father took his last breath in the home he thought was safe. You're about to hear about love, betrayal, deception, and a murder that was written long before a single dose was swallowed. Stay with us. Because what you're about to hear will change the way you see trust. Forever, Missouri, 2017. A warm, humid spring that promised new beginnings. The Grant family had just returned from a weekend at the lake. Photos from that trip would later circulate in the news: Derek on a boat with his son, holding a fishing rod, Nina sitting in the shade, sunglasses on, smiling wide. To anyone looking in, they were a unit. A family with laughter in their home, food in the fridge, and stability built over nearly 12 years of marriage. But that image, the one people clung to, was a snapshot. A freeze frame of a moment. The truth, as it always does, lived in motion. Derek Grant, 42, was a contractor. Quiet but well-liked. The kind of man who waved at his neighbors without saying much. He was the type to leave early and return late, a man of routine, the kind who carried every responsibility on his back without complaint. His wife, Nina, 38, was more visible. A school administrator known in the PTA circuit, talkative, organized, stylish. She led fundraisers. Helped plan school dances. Smiled with her lips pressed tightly together. She was always present, but rarely vulnerable. Then there was Dr. Samuel Blake. A fixture in the community. Charismatic. Empathetic. The family doctor, friend to both Derek and Nina. A man who had been treating the Grants since the birth of their first child. The kind of man you invited to your child's birthday party. The kind of man who sent personalized Christmas cards every year. He was, to many, a gentleman. To Derek, he was a trusted friend. To Nina, something more. The first whispers of suspicion didn't come from a neighbor or a coworker. They came from Derek himself. A private journal, discovered later in a locked drawer in the garage, revealed a slow-burning uncertainty that had taken root years before his death. He wrote, "Something doesn't feel right. She's distant. Keeps her phone face down. Says she's tired, but her eyes are always wide open. Watching me." He wasn't a man who jumped to conclusions. His entries were calm, methodical. He tracked changes in her mood. Notes about her late-night calls. Her subtle shifts in routine. His entries never accused her. They questioned her. Again and again. In one entry, dated 6 months before he died, he wrote, "I asked her if she loved me. She smiled and said, 'Of course.' But something in me didn't believe it." And then came the entry that investigators would later describe as the turning point. Just one line: "I'm starting to think the kids aren't mine." It wasn't rage. It wasn't even heartbreak. It was resignation. The quiet horror of a man who had begun to understand that the life he had built might have been rooted in a lie, but Derek kept going. He worked. He played with his children. He cooked dinner when Nina worked late. He told no one that until the day he ordered a paternity test behind her back. That decision, according to the timeline established during the investigation, may have cost him his life. Records show the test was requested through an online service. Discreet. DNA collected using toothbrushes and hair strands from his 2 children. The results arrived by email 3 weeks later. According to the timestamp, the message was opened at 11:14 p.m., just 2 days before Derek's death. The results were conclusive. Neither child was biologically his. There were no journal entries after that night. When investigators traced the timeline backward, they found that Nina had visited Dr. Blake's clinic late that same evening. After hours. No appointment. No medical record of the visit. Cameras inside the clinic had been turned off. But one had been left on in the hallway outside. A single frame captured her entering his office. She did not leave until nearly midnight. Within 48 hours, Derek was dead. The official cause was an overdose. A combination of sedatives and muscle relaxants that shut his system down. Substances that he had never been prescribed. Substances that, according to a forensic toxicologist, were typically only available through a licensed physician. At first, the death was ruled accidental. Derek had no history of substance abuse. No signs of depression. But it was ruled accidental nonetheless. That ruling didn't sit well with his sister, Dana. She was the one who urged the police to dig deeper. She told them about the journal. About the look in Derek's eyes the last time she saw him, hollow, distracted, tired. The detectives went back. They reopened the scene. They interviewed Nina again. They asked to see her phone. She refused. A subpoena followed, and that's when the house of cards began to fall. The texts recovered from Nina's phone painted a very different picture than the one she had shared. Over 600 messages exchanged with Dr. Blake over the course of a single month. Some mundane. Some intimate. Others, strategic. One message, dated 1 day after Derek opened the paternity test results, read, "He knows." Dr. Blake replied, "Then we don't have much time." That exchange, more than any other piece of evidence, shifted the investigation from accidental death to homicide. When detectives confronted Nina with the messages, she denied everything. Said they were being misinterpreted. Said the relationship was emotional, not physical. Said Derek had been under immense stress and may have self-medicated. She cried. She told them he had been distant. That their marriage had been falling apart for years, but the evidence didn't bend. It hardened. Then came the autopsy. Redone. This time with a focus on drug concentration. The levels found in Derek's system were over 3 times the lethal dose. Enough to knock out a full-grown man within minutes. Enough to ensure he never had a chance to call for help. It wasn't sloppy. It was clinical. Eventually, the charges came. First against Dr. Blake, unlawful prescription distribution, conspiracy to commit murder. He was arrested outside his clinic. According to witnesses, he didn't resist. He only asked one question: did she say anything? Then, days later, Nina was taken into custody. Their trials were scheduled separately. Dr. Blake, under the weight of the evidence and the pressure of a deal, agreed to testify. His testimony would stun the courtroom that he claimed the relationship began shortly after the birth of Nina's first child. That they had continued the affair through both pregnancies. That he had falsified medical records to hide paternity tests. That Nina told him she couldn't leave Derek because she needed the life he provided. She told me, he said on the stand, that if he ever found out, it would all be over. And when he did find out, it was. Nina sat stone-faced during his testimony. No tears. No outbursts. Just silenced. In her own defense, she claimed she was manipulated. That Dr. Blake took advantage of her vulnerability. That she never wanted Derek dead. That the drugs were meant to calm him down. That everything had spiraled beyond her control. The jury didn't believe her. She was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Dr. Blake received 45 years. Derek's children, who now know the truth, live with his sister. The house was sold. The clinic shut down. And the story became legend in the town where it happened, but those who knew Derek still speak of him in the present tense. They still say, he would've, not, he would have. They say he deserved better. They say he loved his children like they were his own, because to him, they were. His last journal entry, recovered from a flash drive found in his car, was dated just hours before he died. It read, "I don't know what's true anymore. But I still love them. Even if none of this was real, I still love them." That was the man they buried, and that was the truth he never got to speak aloud. The trial may have ended, the verdict may have echoed through the courtroom like a final gavel dropped from the heavens, but for the people closest to Derek Grant, there was no closure. Only questions that lingered in the quiet spaces where answers used to live. Why didn't he say something sooner? Why didn't anyone see what was happening? And how could a man so careful, so deeply committed to his family, miss the signs unraveling around him? The answers didn't come quickly. They came in fragments. In interviews with co-workers who remembered Derek staying late at job sites, often pacing near the back of his truck, phone in hand, face tense. In passing comments from neighbors who once saw Dr. Blake's car parked in the Grant driveway when Derek was out of town. In a teacher's remark about how Nina always insisted on attending parent-teacher meetings alone, even when both parents were invited, but none of these moments seemed suspicious at the time. No one questioned them. No one wanted to believe that a betrayal so intimate could be unfolding in plain sight. After the verdict, investigators released a series of emails between Nina and Dr. Blake that had been extracted from a deleted folder in her cloud storage. The dates stretched back years, more than anyone had expected. There were discussions about the children. About who they resembled. How they couldn't let Derek know. How the truth would destroy everything they had worked so hard to build, and then, chillingly, a message dated 2 months before Derek's death. "If it ever comes out, he'll never let me go. You know that, right?" Followed by Dr. Blake's reply, "Then we have to make sure it doesn't come out." The prosecution referred to that message as the moment of intent. It was never about passion. It was never about a moment of weakness. It was logistics. Planning. A crime crafted over years and executed within days, but this wasn't a story that ended with a single courtroom drama. It unfolded again in civil court. Derek's sister, Dana, sued Nina for wrongful death and won. The estate, once belonging to a married couple building a life together, was stripped away. The proceeds from the home sale went toward the children's college funds, held in trust. Not because of Nina, but in spite of her. And then, there were the recordings. During a secondary search of Nina's laptop, investigators discovered a series of audio files. Most were mundane, conversations with co-workers, reminders to herself, even shopping lists. But one, dated 4 days before Derek's death, stood out. That it was a conversation between her and Dr. Blake. The file was partially corrupted, but what remained was enough. "Nina, what if he already knows?" "Blake, then this is the only way. We can't live like this anymore." "Nina, I'm scared." "Blake, I'm not." Those 4 words. Played during the trial. Played again on national broadcasts. Echoed again and again until they became synonymous with everything the case had come to represent: trust turned inside out. Love manipulated. A marriage used as camouflage. The media coverage spread fast. Headlines used phrases like, "the perfect lie," and "doctor of death." Talk shows speculated about the psychology of deception, about how someone could raise 2 children with a man they never truly intended to keep in their life, but those headlines missed something. They missed who Derek really was. That he wasn't just the victim of a crime. He was a man who lived with quiet dignity, even when his world was collapsing. A man who never raised his voice. Who never retaliated. Who never punished his children for a truth that should have broken him. His funeral drew more than 300 people. Friends. Family. Strangers who had read about the story and wanted to pay their respects. His eulogy, written by Dana, ended with this: he was a man who believed in showing up. Even when it hurt. Even when he had every reason not to. He stayed. He gave. He protected. And now, we protect his memory. After the trial, Nina was transferred to a state correctional facility, where she remains in isolation for her own safety. According to prison staff, she rarely speaks. She receives no visitors. Her children have refused contact. Dr. Blake's medical license was revoked immediately after his conviction. The clinic was torn down 6 months later. In its place now stands a playground built with donations from Derek's former colleagues. There's a plaque near the entrance that it reads, "In memory of Derek Grant. A man who loved without condition. A father in every way that mattered." Time continues. Seasons change. The news cycle moves on. But in the small community where Derek once lived, his story remains a cautionary tale. Not just about murder. But about masks people wear. About the danger of secrets. And about the strength it takes to choose love, even when the truth cuts deepest. And still, the final unanswered question endures: did Derek know the end was near, or did he still believe that love, even broken, could be salvaged? We may never know, but what we do know is this: he didn't fail. He fathered children who still speak his name with pride. He lived a life of commitment and integrity, long after those around him stopped doing the same, and in a world full of deception, his honesty, his quiet resilience, remain the most powerful truths of all. 6 months after Nina's sentencing, a private investigator named Marlon Dorsey reopened a folder he'd nearly forgotten. It was filled with notes from his early work on the case, before the police took over, before national media turned the story into headlines. There were scraps of conversations he'd recorded with hospital staff, logs of Dr. Blake's movements, and photographs that, at the time, hadn't meant much. But something about the case never sat right with him. He'd worked a lot of messy affairs. A lot of broken marriages. But this one, it wasn't just about betrayal. It was about precision. And Marlon knew that when a crime is that carefully executed, there's always more than one layer. He started with the call logs. Dr. Blake had used 2 phones. One issued by the clinic, the other a prepaid device, registered under a fake name. The burner phone had been turned off 2 days before Derek's death. Deleted, wiped, and never found, but one call, a single call, had been made from that burner to an unknown number 3 weeks before the murder. The number belonged to a woman named Teresa Caldwell. At first glance, she didn't seem connected. She was a licensed pharmacist in another state, had never met Derek Grant, had no ties to Nina or Dr. Blake. But her voice appeared on one of the voicemails retrieved from Derek's phone, recorded months before his death. "Hi, Derek. I hope this isn't too forward, but I wanted to let you know the results came back, and there were no anomalies. Just keep taking what we discussed. You're doing great." There had never been a prescription registered under Derek's name. No medical chart. Nothing tying him to that clinic. So what had he been taking? Marlon dug deeper. He traced the number, ran it through encrypted archives, and found that Caldwell had once worked as a contract advisor for a private clinic in Baltimore that was shut down years earlier for operating off the books. Quiet treatments. Experimental trials. Mostly hormone-based medications, and one of those medications, it mimicked the symptoms of stress-induced hypertension. Headaches. Dizziness. Fatigue. Symptoms Derek had complained about in his final months. The puzzle was coming into focus. Derek hadn't been in the dark as everyone assumed. He hadn't just noticed his wife pulling away. He had felt something physically wrong. Something deep in his blood. He'd started seeking answers in places his insurance wouldn't cover, with people outside his network. People like Caldwell. There was a theory Marlon couldn't let go of. What if Derek had been poisoned? He reached out to the coroner who signed Derek's death certificate. Heart attack. Brought on by trauma. But the official autopsy hadn't tested for exotic compounds. Not uncommon, unless foul play was suspected at the time. Most autopsies don't search beyond the basics, Marlon pushed. He paid out of pocket to have the tissue samples re-examined at a private lab. 3 weeks later, the results came in, traces of dimethyltryptamine derivatives, synthetic compounds designed to elevate serotonin to dangerous levels in patients with existing cardiac conditions. Not sold over the counter. Not traceable without very specific toxicology screens. Not detectable after the body had been embalmed, unless someone knew exactly what to look for. It changed everything. The prosecution had been right about the motive. But wrong about the method. Derek didn't die just from gunshot wounds. His body had been weakened in advance. Methodically. Subtly. His death wasn't spontaneous. It had been architected. Investigators petitioned for an appeal, and new charges were filed. Nina and Dr. Blake had not only conspired to murder, they had tested the boundaries of his health long before the final act. They had, according to prosecutors, softened the foundation before tearing down the house. And it worked. Because Derek trusted them both, the second trial was quieter. Cameras were banned. The public had already turned their eyes to newer scandals. But for Dana, Derek's sister, it wasn't about media anymore. It was about truth. About reclaiming every lie her brother had been made to live under. When the new verdict was handed down, 2 consecutive life sentences, no possibility of parole, Dana stood alone outside the courthouse. No reporters. No flashing lights. The sound of her voice as she whispered, he knew. And he still stayed. That's who he was. Years passed. The children, Maya and Isaiah, were adopted by Dana. They never visited their mother. But sometimes, they asked about their father. They wanted to know what he was like when the cameras weren't around. When there were no headlines. When he wasn't a symbol of tragedy. Dana would take out a small wooden box from the top shelf of her closet. Inside were Derek's letters, dozens of them. To Maya. To Isaiah. Letters he'd written late at night, saved for when they were older. He never knew they would become a legacy. He only knew he wanted them to remember. One of the letters, written just 3 months before his death, read, "If you ever feel like the world is too heavy, remember this. Your life started with love. No matter what happens, that part was always real. You were born from my heart, and that will never change." The children grew, they healed slowly, and in a quiet neighborhood where a house once stood full of secrets, now there is only space. Grass grown over. Fence taken down. The mailbox removed, but if you listen closely on a windy day, you can still hear the faint chime of a forgotten windbell, hung there by Derek the year Isaiah was born. The world moves on, but truth, once uncovered, never disappears. It lives in echoes. It lives in memory. It lives in the love that refused to die. 2 years after the second conviction, on the anniversary of Derek's death, a local journalist named Evelyn Chen published a long-form article titled, "The Quiet Father, What Derek Grant Knew." It was the first time someone had taken the full timeline, everything from Nina's manipulation, to Dr. Blake's background, to the pharmacological evidence, and pieced it together from Derek's perspective. The article began with a haunting line, "This is not a story about how a man died. It's a story about how he lived, while carrying the weight of what he couldn't prove." Evelyn's investigation took her across 3 states, through 6 years of hidden documents, private correspondences, and testimonies that had never been admitted into court. She spoke with Derek's co-workers, his pastor, even an ex-girlfriend he had briefly reconnected with during a rough patch in his marriage, someone he had confided in, cautiously, and without malice that he had told her something then. Something that chilled Evelyn when she read it in her own notebook later. It's not that I think she's cheating. It's that I don't know who she is when I'm not around anymore. The quote ran at the top of the second section of her piece. Right above a photo of Derek, smiling with Maya on his shoulders, his eyes squinting in the sun. There was a quiet weight to his face, the kind of weariness you only notice once you know what came next. Evelyn tracked down hospital records that revealed Dr. Blake had once been reprimanded at a private facility in his early residency. Nothing criminal. Nothing that barred him from practicing. But a note remained in the internal file, marked "inappropriate boundary with patient, verbal warning issued." The patient's name was redacted. But the year matched Nina's pregnancy with Maya. Evelyn's theory wasn't just that the affair had lasted for years. Her reporting suggested it may have begun long before either child was born. Possibly even before Derek and Nina were married. A private message exchange, recovered from a friend of Nina's who had distanced herself from her years prior, hinted at an even more disturbing timeline. The friend had messaged Nina after Maya's birth. The message read, "She looks just like him. Are you sure you want to do this?" Nina never replied. But the friend showed Evelyn her response to herself, written in her private journal. "I don't think she knows what she's doing. Or maybe she does. Either way, I can't help her anymore." Those details never made it into court. But Evelyn's story brought them to the public. It reframed the narrative, not just of betrayal, but of deliberate deception spanning nearly a decade. It also reignited a public conversation about parental rights, paternity fraud, and the legal protections, or lack thereof, for men in Derek's situation. A petition was launched in his name, nicknamed the Derek Law, aimed at requiring transparency in paternity disputes when raised during criminal investigations. It gathered nearly 500,000 signatures within the first 2 months, but not everyone supported it. There were those who claimed the focus should remain on the crime, not on genetics. That Derek's love for Maya and Isaiah proved paternity didn't matter. Dana disagreed. She gave an interview, reluctantly, to address it. "My brother would have loved them no matter what. That's not the point. The point is he was denied the truth. From the woman he married. From the man who was supposed to be their doctor. From everyone who stood by and stayed quiet." And then she said something she hadn't said before. "The night before he died, he called me. He told me he was scared to sleep. That he'd been blacking out, waking up in places he didn't remember getting to. He asked me to watch the kids if anything ever happened to him." Her voice cracked. Then steadied. He knew something was coming. He just didn't know what. After Evelyn's article, a podcast episode featuring the case hit #1 on national charts. It reassembled the events from a psychological angle. Experts weighed in. Behavioral analysts dissected Nina's testimony. They pointed to her effect during the trial, flat, emotionless. They analyzed Dr. Blake's letters to her, found patterns of narcissistic language. One psychologist claimed the entire dynamic between them mirrored a classic folie à deux, a shared delusion, strengthened by isolation and secrecy, but the most chilling detail came from a single photograph Evelyn had uncovered. It showed Derek at Isaiah's 6th birthday party. Standing behind a table, knife in hand, cutting cake. Everyone else in the picture was laughing. But Derek? He was staring straight at the camera. Not smiling. Not angry. Just, watching, and on the table in front of him, barely visible in the blur of candles and streamers, sat an open bottle of prescription pills, the same ones later identified in the toxicology reanalysis. It wasn't just the murder that haunted people. It was the long, invisible death that came before it. Today, Maya is in college. Isaiah, finishing high school. They live with the quiet understanding that their lives began under a lie, but were rescued by a truth. They know their father stayed, even when he had every reason to run. That he protected them, even as the world beneath him collapsed. Every year on his birthday, they visit a bench by the lake where Derek used to take them fishing. There's a plaque there now. Simple. Worn down by weather, but still legible. It says, he never gave up on love. Even when it gave up on him. Some stories fade, but others, like this one, live on in memory, in legacy, and in the questions that still wake us in the middle of the night. What would you do if the people you trusted most were the ones holding the knife, and how long would you stay, knowing the walls were closing in? Derek Grant stayed until the very end, because for him, fatherhood was never conditional, and love was never something you earned. It was something you gave. Fully. Fiercely. Without fear, even when it cost you everything. That if this story moved you, if Derek's quiet strength and the chilling betrayal he endured made you pause, we want to hear your thoughts. Do you believe justice was truly served? What would you have done in Derek's place? Leave a comment below. Your perspective might help someone else see the story in a new light. That if you're drawn to real cases like this, where truth is tangled in love, lies, and unthinkable choices, make sure to subscribe. We release deep dive stories just like this every week. Like the video to support our work, share it with someone who needs to hear Derek's story, and turn on notifications so you never miss a moment. There are more stories out there waiting to be told. Some are buried, some are forgotten, but together, we'll bring them to light. Thank you for watching.